Well, the Member of Parliament, Nqabayomzi Kwankwa, has recently returned from a fact-finding mission in the DRC. He was part of a delegation from the African Parliamentarians Association for Human Rights, and he joins us now in our Cape Town studios. A very good evening to you, Mr. Kwankwa. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, take us through what the terms of reference were for this fact-finding mission.
The fact-finding mission, basically, let me first take this opportunity to thank you for having us on the program, and good evening to the viewers at home as well. The purpose of the fact-finding mission really were to assess firstly the state of democracy in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in broad terms. And the second issue was to assess the pre-election environment in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that entailed obviously engaging with various stakeholders in the DRC to try and establish as to whether or not the country is ready to hold the December 23 elections, and whether there are steps being undertaken to try and address some of the issues that have to do with democracy. Remember, AfriPA, as we call it for short, which is the African Parliamentarians Association for Human Rights, focuses mainly on promoting democracy and human rights on the continent. So we had to go there and try to establish, talk to stakeholders, establish their state of readiness. And once that process had been done, we obviously need to sit down and try to write a report which will contain our observations together with our recommendations about what we discovered in the DRC. And there we interacted with various stakeholders. The political role players were able to even interact with government institutions. For example, the Electoral Commission there, we met the president of the Senate there, who did a demonstration for us of how the very controversial electronic voting machine works. We're able to also talk to opposition parties there, civil society organizations. We had an opportunity, for instance, to even talk to the Catholic Church in the DRC. So we're very happy about how the peoples of the Democratic Republic of Congo welcomed us. And obviously we did that as a network of young parliamentarians on the African continent. There's about 80 of us, but we had to represent that 80 as the steering committee of AfriPA.
So from your observation and analysis, is the DRC ready to go to the polls?
Well, one must admit that certain progress has been made in the country in terms of trying to prepare for elections, but there are obviously challenges. I mean, a number of stakeholders, especially opposition party leaders, are not satisfied with the introduction of the electronic voting system, while when we engaged government in the Senate in particular, they demonstrated to us as to why they felt that they needed to go the electronic voting system way rather than doing it manually. So they highlighted some of the challenges, but I think the problem perhaps does not necessarily have to do with the electronic voting machine system itself. I think it's more how it was introduced. It more has to do with the lack of consultation in the entire process, and the fact that some of them have concerns around the fact that I think it's against the law at this point in time to use an electronic voting machine in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So some of the things center around a lack of trust among the various stakeholders, a lack of communication and consultation about some of the decisions that need to be made, so that they both understand exactly where they want to move as a nation. I think that's what is lacking. But some of the issues are within the reach of the different stakeholders in terms of coming up with compromises. Compromises can be reached on the way forward, but more discussions and dialogue around these issues are required. It is for that reason that we've been saying we think that a multi-stakeholder engagement is required in the Democratic Republic of Congo, so that the people of the DRC, can be able to decide on their own what is the best way forward in terms of going to the December 23 elections.
I want to engage you more, Mr. Kwankwa, on the political dynamics in the DRC post the 23rd of December elections. Some are of the belief that, Joseph Kabila stepping down from the race will not change the power dynamics in that country. His firm favorite, apparently, is Mr. Emmanuel Shadary, and there's been speculation that if Shadary eventually takes up power, there will be reports to the fact that Mr. Kabila will be his prime minister under his leadership. What have you heard with regards to that?
Well, obviously, when you interact with the political role players in particular, people are going to make those accusations. They will say, for instance, that they think that Shadary, who is the SSG of PPRD at the present moment, when he takes over from Kabila, is going to perpetuate or continue what Kabila was doing, or President Kabila was doing. But obviously, that depends entirely on Shadari as a leader. Look, for instance, many people thought in Zimbabwe that to a considerable extent President Mnangagwa was going to continue with what former President Mugabe was doing, but you can see that he's decided to actually carve his own niche, he's decided to say that he wants to leave his own legacy. It also depends on the person who's going to succeed President Kabila, on what legacy he wants to leave for the country, what vision he has for the country. But what is important currently is for the political role players in the country to try to work together to address some of the challenges that face the country. Issues that have to do, for example, with voter education. I mean, if you introduce an electronic voting machine without having conducted proper voter education, firstly, what the challenge that you're going to face is that the outcome of the process will not be credible. There'll be parties who will not accept the voting machine as you prepare for elections. It means that you are going to have a situation where after the announcement of the results, there will be challenges that you're going to experience in terms of whoever loses ends up on the losing side, accepting or being willing to accept the outcome of that democratic process, an example, if it were to be democratic. So it means that a lot of work has to be done going to the elections firstly, a lot of dialogue, conversation about the challenges facing the DRC and how those can be resolved in preparation for the elections on the 23rd will determine as to what kind of DRC you're going to have post-elections. Because if we do not deal with the trust deficit issue, if we don't deal with the multi-stakeholder engagement, the consultation process that needs to take place about a wide range of issues that affect a number of stakeholders there, you will not be able to have a DRC that will respect the outcome of the December 23 elections if we don't deal with those issues. What happens after the December 23, whether so-and-so wins, what is important is that that person must have an agenda that drives or that focuses on the development of the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, lifting them out of the malice of poverty and underdevelopment.
When President Joseph Kabila announced that the DRC does not want any foreign help in the form of finances, perhaps in the form of foreign envoys, remember that he rejected former President Thabo Mbeki as a special envoy from South Africa. Well, I suppose that there will be less scrutiny on the whole election process, and that will subject the whole electoral process to further intimidation, or should I say further manipulation internally. Is that a fair assessment?
Look, when Ambassador Mpoko, which was part of your package earlier, did highlight their concern as a country in the meeting that we had I had with him about 2-3 weeks ago, the use of special envoys and how some of the special envoys from various parts of the world may have misbehaved in the country over the past couple of years and who did not even achieve some of the objectives they said they'd come in there to achieve. I think that issue would need to be dealt with at a regional level and perhaps at a continental level as well, to say how do they control this issue of special envoys. But the other issue, which I think relates to your question, is the concern of other stakeholders were saying. For instance, there's a lack of transparency about the funding model for these elections, who's funding them, how much do they need, whether there's enough money to be able to go to elections, what are the shortfalls, how are they going to be financed. These are all the questions that concern the various stakeholders, to say if these questions aren't addressed properly, what would end up happening, or the likelihood is that on the election day they are going to encounter challenges. Remember, you are talking about a very huge country where you have about 90,000 voting stations and 105,000 voting machines, electronic voting machines, which will have to be distributed around the country, which will have to be managed. It means it's a massive system that needs operational control at one center for its effectiveness firstly, but at the same time, if people don't understand how the entire process is being funded, how the operating model is going to be funded, it means you are likely to encounter challenges. Because look, you are making a very important example to say there were offers to say the DRC would be helped to some extent by some stakeholders to try and finance the elections there, and those were rejected. But I'm also aware that certain conditions by the very same funders were put in place, which according to some of the sources, what made them uncomfortable in terms of trying to accept that funding were the conditions that were put in place, which would then ultimately end up undermining the sovereignty of the country. But those are issues that, when you have that kind of multi-stakeholder engagement that we talk about, facilitated, the mediation efforts that should be facilitated by regional bodies and continental bodies, they would be able then to sit around the table and talk about those issues and try to find common solutions to those challenges.
And I guess that all eyes will be on those regional bodies, Mr. Kwankwa. But then thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Correct.
Well, that was a Member of Parliament, Nqabayomzi Kwankwa, joining us from our Cape Town studio.